What's up, guys? Welcome to Knockers on the Bottom. I'm your host, Jay Mill. Jay Mill, if you like. So let's get into it. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And again, just like last episode, just really want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys so much for listening. Very grateful to have you guys here. And, hopefully 2026 is a better year for the podcast as we continue to go. But yeah, so the Cowboys have been selected to play in the first game in Rio. So the first NFL game in Rio de Janeiro, Cowboys are going to be the team. Now, we don't know who they're playing yet. We know they're giving up one of their home games, right? They get 9 home games next year. So, of course, Jerry Jones, being the person that he is, he doesn't want to give up home games when the Cowboys only have 8 to go play overseas. So this year they have 9. Makes, complete sense for him to give up one. So they're playing in Rio. The stadium is like a 70,000 seat capacity stadium. Now, I know they have home games next year against the Cardinals. They have home games next year against the Jaguars. Their normal NFC East slate, of course. And then I believe they play the Seahawks at home as well. So they do have, I think, the Bucks as well. So they have a number of games to choose from. That'll be, pretty decent profile. Now, the last time the Cowboys played overseas was in Wembley in London, and they played against the Jaguars. So we could see that again, especially since the Jaguars are already on their schedule. Jaguars are like the freaking travel kings of the NFL. They're always going overseas somewhere, so it wouldn't surprise me if they said yes and, the NFL threw them into that mix as well. But we'll see what happens. It's just kind of cool to see the Cowboys actually get a home game overseas. And, it's been a while, it's been a while since they've done that. Everybody usually enjoys it. They're the biggest brand, so I kind of look forward to seeing it. I hope it's early in the season. I know it's going to be one of those games where, it's going to be super early in the morning, but I don't think I'm on the East Coast, and I don't think they're going to be too far away from my time zone where they're lining up there. So another news in Cowboys land, unfortunately, here we go again, right? Darren Woodson gets snubbed for the Hall of Fame once again. I believe this was his last year of eligibility on the regular ballot, which means now if he does end up getting in, it's going to be one of those ballots for like, a historical ballot or one of the like the older candidate ballot, which, I mean, that means we might not see Woody get in for another 10, 15 years, honestly. It's going to be a long time. I don't know why. All right, he is an all-decade team member. He is a multiple-time all-pro. He's a big contributor on a multiple Super Bowl winning defense. Like Cowboys won 92, 93, 95, and he was a big part of those Super Bowl championships. If you think about the best players on that defense, I mean, you've got Charles Haley is in the Hall of Fame. You have Deion Sanders in the Hall of Fame. Other than that, though, I mean, the Cowboys haven't gotten any love, and not just from that perspective. I mean, Nate Newton should be in the Hall of Fame. He's not in the Hall of Fame. So I mean, the Cowboys, for some reason, even though they had a dynasty in the 90s, and we can all sit here and debate whether or not they've done the things in the last 30 years to even give themselves a remote chance, or maybe we can't debate because the answer is just simply no. What we cannot debate is that a team that was that dominant for that long deserves more than like a handful of Hall of Famers. If you look at the Steelers in the 70s that were dominant for a long time, they've got like 14 people from those teams in the Hall of Fame. And the Cowboys are sitting here with, like I said, a handful of guys. I mean, it took Jimmy Johnson forever to get into the Hall of Fame, and he won, 2 of those 3 Super Bowls and was the architect of the team that was in place for that 3rd Super Bowl. So Woody not getting in, to me, kind of lends itself to Cowboys bias. A lot of people either love to hate or watch the Cowboys. And as we're getting older here and the Cowboys are further removed from their success, it's going to take a lot more for some of those guys that people didn't watch play to get into the Hall of Fame. I mean, luckily, Michael Irvin, Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, those type of guys, have long since been retired, and they were super remembered because they were marketable. They were marketed as the triplets. So we kind of knew the triplets were doing, they're going into the Hall of Fame no matter what. They made a big deal about it. They're offensive players, which is already biased in our league today. But Not in the case of Jason Witten, because guess who else didn't get in? Jason Witten, the man with 13,000 yards as a tight end. Now, you can look at his touchdown catches and say he didn't even break, 80 touchdown catches in his career, which is true. He didn't. He was not that type of guy. And Witten was a 5 to 6 touchdown a season type of guy, but he was like a 90 catch monster. He was 1,000 yard guy pretty much all the time. So he was a great receiver. He just wasn't a touchdown machine. You had some other guys in the teams who were better at that. Marion Barber, Des Bryant, players like that that were better at getting into the end zone or at least more of a threat. And so when they got into the red zone, the quarterback will go that way more often, but it doesn't take away from when you think of the prototypical tight end. Jason Witten is the guy that you think of, right? He blocks well. He runs routes well. He might not be the fastest guy, but he knows how to separate. He's very nuanced. And then early in his career, he was tough to bring down once he got the ball. Now, all of us, in this year, we're thinking 2026, 2025. So all of us vividly remember the end of Jason Witten's career, which was he had slowed down a lot. He still would catch everything. He just wasn't getting anything after the catch for you. And it was very difficult for him in his last 3 or 4 years to kind of hang it up. But he's not a stat compiler. People call him that sometimes, but he's not. Witten had about a 9 to 10 year stretch where he was pretty much the same player year after year. Like he wasn't declining or he wasn't having these big spikes in production and only to not show up the next season. He was the pillar of consistency. So it's going to be interesting because if Witten doesn't get in on the first ballot, how long is it going to take Jason Witten to get in? If you don't see him as a first ballot Hall of Famer, what is a first ballot Hall of Famer? Apparently, Bill Belichick isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer. Darren Woodson isn't a Hall of Famer. Jason Witten isn't a first ballot Hall of Famer. So it's going to be very interesting to see here over the next few years. Who the hell's getting in? If we're not giving some of these guys their due, who the hell's getting in? So one of the other things I wanted to cover, and the last thing I want to get to today for the Cowboys news is Max Crosby, right? So there's been a lot of rumors going around that all of a sudden Max Crosby is done with the Raiders. He does not want to be there anymore. And the top teams on his list are the Cowboys, and the 49ers are also one of them. And there was one more there that I forget. Oh, Detroit Lions. So those seem to be his 3 choices of destination. Jay Glazer thinks that the package for Max Crosby is going to be bigger than the package for Micah Parsons. Ian Rappaport doesn't see that way so much. He thinks it's going to be a later first round pick. So let's take a look. Hey, listen, if it's the deal for Micah Parsons, I'm out. I'm not giving up 2 first round picks and a player on the team. I'm not dealing 2 first round picks and Donovan Ezaraku, to the Raiders for Max Crosby. Sorry, see you later. Thank you so much. You are 29 years old and you're going into the latter half of your career and you have a contract with a number of years left. If you guys are looking at the screen right now, you see the production, you see the contract that he has, right? So if it's one of those Micah Parsons type deals, I'm not doing it. Now, if it's a later first round pick, so say the Cowboys have 20, right? If he can be had for the 20th pick, now I'm kind of listening a little bit, right? Because even though, like I just said, if it's a Micah Parsons pick, I think the value versus what you're getting back doesn't make sense, right? If you're giving up multiple first round picks and players for this guy, that doesn't make sense. Now, if you're giving up 1 first round pick and it's your later of the 2 that you have, that makes sense. He is, for PFF, again, not the end all be all, just using some metrics to kind of help put context to whether or not he's worth what the Cowboys would give up in a 20th pick. 20th pick, he is ranked as the 16th defensive end. So right away, getting a defensive end that's in at least the top half of the league, middle of the league, whatever you want to say, but you're instantly getting probably your best defensive end. It depends on the jump you get year 2 from Donovan Ezaraku. But you get in that, he was 20th against the pass and 11th against the run. So we know the Cowboys traded Micah Parsons because they wanted to get better in the run game. When you're adding Max Crosby, you're not necessarily going to get worse in the run game here. So that kind of fits what the Cowboys are looking for. So he had 10 sacks last year. He had 29 pressures, and he had a pass rush win rate of 15%. So if you're looking at that, that win rate is 15th in the league. So again, he's ranked as the 16th overall defensive end. He's ranked 15th in win rate. He's giving you something against the run. He still has double-digit sacks. And if you're looking at the screen, you see 3 out of the last 4 years, he's had double-digit sacks. So you're getting some pretty decent production there. And I think if we're looking at it in terms of the Cowboys trying to A, set their new defensive coordinator up with a player who would be able to help him right away, veteran guy, and B, trying to maximize how good you can get the defense while Dak Prescott is under the rest of this deal, checks that box. You can see the contract there a little bit. You know, you've got an out after a couple of years, but he's under team control for at least 3 more seasons. But you can get out after, 2 seasons. So it does make sense if it's the 20th pick. The only thing you can't predict is that Crosby's had a number of injuries throughout the course of his season, or his career, I'm sorry, and this season. But throughout the course of his career, and he's played a lot of snaps. He's been very durable and played through some of those injuries. So sometimes when you have guys that do that, they can hit a precipitous drop very quickly. You can get to a point in their career where it's like, where did this guy go? He was awesome, 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 and then boom, right? So that's kind of scary a little bit because, of course, you have him for 2 more years. If he drops off tremendously, then it'll look like a little bit of a failure. But if he gives you what he's been giving you in the run game, and he gives you similar production to what he's done. Let's cut off 3 out of the last 4 years. Let's just say the last 2 years. That's about 18 sacks or so. So it gives you about 9 sacks a season for the next couple seasons and stays around the 15% pass rush win rate. And then, maybe gives you a couple of games in there where he wins at like a 20 to 25% rate. Maybe that sounds like something that the Cowboys could use. So, all in all, if it were me, if it were Jason, I don't know if I would necessarily trade for Max Crosby, and it has nothing to do with him, his contract, or his production, or his age. Those aren't necessarily the factors, even though we outlined them here. My number one reason why I wouldn't trade for Max Crosby is because I have no idea how the Cowboys' defensive scheme is going to look. Christian Parker does, right? But if we're just talking about me, Jay, I'm not doing that because I don't know. I don't know. Are we going to trade for Max Crosby and make him a stand-up outside linebacker in a 3-4 defensive scheme where he's dropping into coverage, 30% of the time? Are we not running a 3-4 because if it's just, a base defense that's more nickel oriented, where his hands in the ground most of the time, boom, that sounds like an awesome idea. But I don't know that. So it's going to be interesting to see because I do think, right, that Christian Parker should have an idea of that vision and Brian Schottenheimer should have an idea of that vision as far as what we want the defense to look like, what kind of personnel fits nice into that defense. But honestly, it's so fresh, it's so new. It's probably better off to go with young talent that is also fresh to the idea so that they're learning this as soon as they come into the NFL. This is what they know, right? This is what they do. I do know some of the coaches that we hired are really good at getting production out of the edge. So I do think like Donovan Ezeraku, for example, if this ends up being a 3-4 scheme where he's standing up on the outside and he's playing linebacker and he's in a 2-point stance and sometimes he's dropping into coverage, other times he's coming off the after the quarterback. I think this scheme is going to fit Ezeraku perfectly. Like I think this is exactly the type of scheme Donovan Ezeraku should thrive in, right? But Max Crosby's been playing a very similar defensive scheme through his entire career. There's been a little bit of changes here, but for the most part, he's been in kind of that Matt Eberflus scheme, that 4-down lineman, a lot of zone, even though that doesn't really affect him much because he's usually just hunting the quarterback or setting the edge in the rushing game. So it's going to be interesting. I think that's the biggest factor for me is does he fit the scheme? Contract aside, all that aside, and honestly, if I'm building my defense and my team in general, right, that is the most important part to me. Do they fit in my scheme? The Cowboys like glittery things. The Cowboys like to draft the money five positions, but they don't necessarily usually have a vision for this puzzle piece going right where it needs to be in order to make that puzzle whole. That's why we haven't done anything in the playoffs. Well, not anything. We've won playoff games, but that's why we haven't had much success in the playoffs over the last 30 years, because the Cowboys just always seem like a collection of talent without a cohesive vision. So hopefully with the new defensive coordinator and the new defensive staff, like I said, Schottenheimer, you're starting to get some alignment from top to bottom, and hopefully that rounds itself into a vision of what the team is supposed to be. And then with that vision comes the proper selection of the type of players, even though they might not be glittery names, that fit your scheme and are productive in ways that push you over the top and help you win games when it matters the most. We'll see. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can hit me up on Twitter at JMillerIYL. That's JMiller if you like. You can also hit me up at knockersonthebottom@outlook.com or knockersonthebottom@gmail.com. Leave any comments, questions below, anything like that. But like I said, like button, subscribe button. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Until next time, I'm your host, JMill if you like. This has been Knockers on the Bottom. Peace.